He had given his country his youth. He had given it his legs. Now, in the cold, sterile silence of a courtroom, they had come for the one thing he had left. Sergeant Alex Stone, a man decorated for his courage in the forgotten valleys of Afghanistan, sat in his wheelchair, his dress uniform a stark reminder of a life he could no longer live. Beside him, watchful and still, was Max. To the court, the dog was an asset, a number on a page, a piece of sophisticated military hardware scheduled for decommissioning. But to Alex, he was the only soldier who never left him behind. The gavel was about to fall, not just on a legal case, but on a sacred promise made between two warriors in the crucible of combat. Alex had come to plead for the soul of his family, believing his fight was against paperwork and protocol. He was wrong. His real enemy wasn't in the courtroom. They were on their way. And they didn't care about the law, a judge's ruling, or a soldier's honor. They only cared about the secret Max carried within him. This is the story of a soldier's last stand, not on a foreign battlefield, but in the heart of the country he swore to protect, and the unseen war that followed him home. The silence in the courtroom was a weapon. It wasn't the quiet of reverence or contemplation. It was the thick, suffocating silence of a tomb. It pressed down from the high, ornate ceiling, seeped from the dark, polished wood of the pews, and rose from the cold, checkered floor. It was a silence designed to crush a man's spirit, to remind him of his insignificance in the grand, grinding machinery of the law. Sergeant Alex Stone felt its weight in his bones, a familiar pressure that echoed the crushing weight of the armored truck that had pinned him in the dust of some forgotten Afghan valley. He sat in his wheelchair, a vessel of polished metal and cold rubber, his body a landscape of scars, hidden beneath the crisp, immaculate fabric of his dress blues. The uniform was the cruelest irony of all. Once, it had been a second skin, a symbol of strength, of belonging, of an unbreakable brotherhood. Now it felt like a costume, a hollow shell he wore to play the part of the hero society wanted to see, even as they prepared to strip away the last living piece of his soul. The medals pinned to his chest were not badges of honor today. They were tiny, gilded anchors, each one tethered to the ghost of a friend, a memory of fire, a moment of terror. They were so heavy. God, they were heavy. His hand, a roadmap of sinew and scars, rested on the thick leather leash. Beside him, a living, breathing anchor in the suffocating silence, sat Max. To the impassive faces in the jury box, to the tired eyes of Judge Albright on the bench, to the impossibly young army lawyer with ice water in his veins, Max was a German shepherd, a tool, a highly trained, incredibly expensive piece of military hardware designated Asset 734, a line item on a budget now slated for decommissioning. But to Alex, he was the only thing that was real. He saw the courtroom, but his mind superimposed it with other images. The glint of the fluorescent lights off the prosecutor's glasses became the flash of a sniper's scope on a distant ridge. The rhythmic hum of the air conditioning became the low, hypnotic drone of a medevac helicopter. He could almost taste the sand in his mouth, feel the phantom ache in the legs that were no longer there. He was here, but he was also there, trapped in an endless echo of the war. Max was his only bridge between the two worlds. The dog was the only one who had seen him in both places, the only one who knew the man he had been and the wreck he had become. Sergeant Stone. Judge Albright's voice cut through the haze. It was a voice accustomed to command, but today it was tinged with something Alex recognized. Weariness. The sound of a good man about to do a bad thing because the book told him he had to. You have a final statement." This was it, the last stand. Alex wheeled himself forward a few inches, the soft whir of the electric motor an obscenity in the silence. He looked at the judge, a man he felt he should respect, and then at the young Army lawyer, Captain Jennings, a man whose sterile ambition was a physical presence in the room. Jennings held a file. Inside that file were words like operational lifespan, asset reallocation, and final evaluation protocol. Words that meant they were going to take his dog, study him like a lab rat, and then, when they were done, they would put him down. Because it was efficient, because it was protocol. Alex took a breath, the air catching in his throat. He opened his mouth to speak, and the words that came out were not the eloquent speech he had rehearsed in the long, sleepless hours of the night. They were scraped raw, torn from the deepest part of him. "Your Honor," he began, his voice hoarse. "That file in his hands, it tells you what Max can do. It doesn't tell you who he is." His gaze dropped to the dog at his side. Max's ears twitched, his warm brown eyes fixed on Alex's face, sensing the turmoil roiling within him. "That file says he's an asset, but an asset doesn't nudge your hand at 3 a.m. when the nightmares come. An asset doesn't lick the tears off your face when you don't even know you're crying. When I came home, I wasn't a man. I was a collection of broken parts the Army didn't know what to do with. The nights were the worst. The silence. It eats you alive. You lie there and you think about the choices you made, the friends you lost. You think about the man you were supposed to be." He paused, swallowing hard against the lump in his throat. "Max saved me from all that. He didn't need a command. He just knew. He'd put his head on my chest, this big, heavy, warm weight, and I'd focus on the rhythm of his breathing until I could find my own. He was my anchor in the storm. He is the only reason I am sitting here today." He looked up, his eyes locking with the judge's. "The Army took my legs. I let them have that. They took my career. I let them have that too. They are asking to take my brother. I am asking you as a man to not let them." Across the room, Captain Jennings felt an unwelcome flicker of something human. For a split second, Alex Stone ceased to be a file number and became what he was, a decorated hero, broken in the service of his country, begging not to have his last comfort stripped from him. This is the part they don't show you in the recruitment videos, Jennings thought. A brief, treacherous wave of empathy, but he crushed it instantly. His duty was not to the man, but to the mission. The asset was compromised. It represented a catastrophic security breach. His career, his entire future, depended on his ability to remain detached, to see the larger strategic picture. He hardened his face into a mask of professional indifference, his jaw tightening with the effort of silencing his own conscience. Jennings stood, his movements crisp. "Your Honor, Sergeant Stone's service is noted and deeply appreciated. However, his bond with the asset is an unforeseen and regrettable side effect of the K-9 Tactical Integration Program. Asset 734 is government property. The protocol is clear. The transfer to the Aegis Dynamics Research Facility is mandated for national security purposes." Aegis Dynamics. The name sent a chill down Alex's spine. A private contractor, a ghost corporation known for its bleeding edge and ruthless efficiency. This was worse than he thought. This wasn't just bureaucracy. This was business. The profound bond between a soldier and his brother in arms is something no civilian can ever truly understand. If you believe that bond deserves to be honored, take a moment to hit the like button on this video. It's a small gesture, but it's a salute to heroes like Alex and Max. Judge Albright looked from the cold, unyielding face of the captain to the raw, pleading anguish on Alex's. He looked at the American flag standing silent and proud behind him. His face was a portrait of conflict, a man caught between the gears of the very system he had sworn to uphold. He lifted the wooden gavel, its weight seeming to double in his hand. The room held its breath. Alex closed his eyes, bracing for the impact of the words, the final killing blow. He felt Max shift beside him, a warm presence against the cold steel of his wheelchair. This was it. The end. But the sound that broke the silence wasn't the crack of the gavel. It was the low, visceral, terrifyingly familiar growl of a warrior sensing an enemy at the gate. Max was on his feet in an instant, a blur of focused muscle. The leash snapped taut in Alex's hand. The dog's body was a rigid line, his hackles raised, his lips peeled back to reveal a glimmer of white teeth. He paid no attention to the judge, the lawyer, or the gasps from the crowd. His entire being, every fiber of his genetically and tactically honed instincts, was locked on the massive, ornate oak doors at the far end of the courtroom. The war wasn't over. It had just found them. The growl was not a sound of aggression. It was a declaration of war. It rumbled up from the deepest part of Max's chest, a low-frequency vibration that seemed to make the very air in the courtroom tremble. It was a sound Alex Stone knew better than his own heartbeat. It was the sound of imminent danger. Every muscle in Alex's body went rigid. The polished wood of his wheelchair's armrests dug into his palms. His training, dormant for years under a blanket of grief and civilian routine, roared back to life. In a split second, the room transformed in his mind. The judge's bench became an elevated firing position. The pews became insufficient cover. The oak doors at the back of the room became a fatal funnel, a kill box. His world, once again, was a battlefield. "Mr. Stone, I said control your dog." Judge Albright's voice was a hammer of authority, but it struck against a wall of pure, primal instinct. Alex barely heard him. His focus was fused with Max's. The leash in his hand was no longer a tether. It was a live wire, pulsing with the dog's focused fury. He could feel the tension in every corded muscle of the animal's body. And then the memory hit him, not as a gentle wave, but as a violent concussion. The sun. The godforsaken Afghan sun, a white-hot eye in a bleached blue sky, cooking the earth until the air itself shimmered. They were clearing a path through a village that the map said was friendly, but the silence said was a graveyard waiting to happen. Max was 20 yards ahead, a sable ghost gliding over the cracked earth. Then he stopped. He didn't just halt. He froze mid-stride, one paw hovering over the ground, a perfect statue of lethal stillness. Then came the growl, low, certain. Alex saw it, felt it. He didn't think. He screamed, "Bomb! Get down!" The world obeyed. Bodies hit the dirt. Seconds later, the spot where Max's paw would have landed was vaporized by a command-detonated IED, powerful enough to turn a truck into confetti. The concussion had rattled his teeth, but they were alive, because Max knew. Max was never, ever wrong. "Your Honor." Alex's voice boomed through the courtroom, no longer the hoarse plea of a broken man, but the sharp, urgent command of a sergeant. "That is a threat alert. Evacuate this room now." But his words were swallowed by a new sound, a sound from the hallway beyond the doors that made the hair on Alex's arms stand on end. A sharp, metallic click-clang. It wasn't the sound of a normal door. It was the sound of a manual bolt being thrown, a heavy lock being disengaged from the outside. Someone wasn't asking for entry. They were granting themselves access. The two bailiffs, their faces now pale masks of adrenaline, moved toward the doors, their sidearms drawn and held low. "This is courthouse security!" the lead bailiff shouted, his voice straining to sound bigger than the fear that was gripping the room. "Identify yourself." Silence. A thick, oppressive silence that was more terrifying than any scream. And then, a footstep, heavy, deliberate, unhurried. The sound of expensive leather on polished marble. The sound of a man with no fear at all. Thump. A pause. Thump. He wasn't running. He wasn't hiding. He was coming. "Get away from the door!" Alex yelled at the bailiffs, yanking on Max's leash. But the dog was an immovable anchor of righteous fury. Max's growl had now escalated into a full-throated continuous bark, a savage warning meant to drive back the approaching darkness. The door handle, a heavy brass lever, began to turn. Slowly, smoothly. The motion was unnervingly graceful. The crowd shrank back in their seats, a collective gasp sucking the air from the room. The door swung inward, a silent, heavy pendulum, revealing a dim, empty hallway. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. The empty space seemed to mock the tension. One of the bailiffs took a hesitant step forward, peering into the gloom. "There's no one." He never finished the sentence. A figure detached itself from the deeper shadows of the hall, stepping over the threshold into the courtroom. He was a phantom in a business suit. His dark gray suit was impeccably tailored, his posture relaxed, his hands empty. But it was his eyes that held the room hostage. They were pale, the color of a winter sky, and they scanned the scene with the detached curiosity of a biologist studying an ant farm. He radiated an aura of absolute control, a chilling stillness at the center of the growing panic. He ignored the judge. He ignored the drawn weapons of the bailiffs. His gaze swept past them all and landed, with an unnerving intensity, on Max. The man smiled, a razor-thin line that held no warmth, only a cold reptilian satisfaction. "An impressive display," he said, his voice a calm, cultured baritone that was utterly at odds with the terror he was creating, but entirely expected. He took another step into the room, his movements fluid and precise. "My name is Silas. I apologize for the intrusion." He dipped his head in a mock bow toward the judge's bench. "I'm here on behalf of Aegis Dynamics. I've come to retrieve our property." His pale eyes shifted from Max to Alex, and for the first time, a flicker of something that might have been annoyance crossed his perfect, placid features. "You," he said, the single word dripping with condescension, "have been a considerable inconvenience, Sergeant." The war had come home, and it was wearing a $1,000 suit. The name hung in the air like poison gas. Aegis Dynamics. To the judge, to the terrified spectators, to the bailiffs whose hands were slick with sweat on the grips of their pistols, the name meant nothing. It was just two words. But to Sergeant Alex Stone, it was a name whispered in the dark corners of the military world, a ghost story told by grizzled operators in forward operating bases. Aegis was a myth, a shadow contractor that didn't officially exist. They were the creators of black box technology, the architects of weapon systems so advanced they bordered on science fiction. And this phantom, this corporate boogeyman, was standing in a civilian courtroom, claiming ownership of his dog. Silas took another step, and the two operatives behind him moved in perfect, mirrored synchronicity, their feet making no sound on the marble floor. They weren't thugs. They were predators. Their movements were a silent language of dominance, establishing a perimeter, cutting off Alex and Max from the rest of the room. The world had shrunk to the space between them. "You look confused, Sergeant," Silas said, his voice laced with a predatory pity. "Let me clarify. You believe your service dog was a product of a government program. He was not. He was a field test, a very, very successful one. He gestured vaguely at Max, who was still emitting a low, continuous snarl, a wall of sound against the encroaching threat. That is not a dog. Not in any sense that you would understand. That is the culmination of a billion-dollar research and development initiative, Project Chimera. The words were clinical, detached, but they hit Alex like a physical blow. He stared at Max, at the familiar brown eyes, the noble head, the scar above his left eye from a piece of shrapnel. He saw a brother. Silas saw a product. We didn't just train him, Sergeant. Silas continued, his voice taking on the enthusiastic cadence of a CEO at a shareholders meeting. We built him from the genetic level up. His olfactory senses are augmented with synthetic receptors that can detect not just explosives, but the specific biochemical markers of human adrenaline and cortisol. He doesn't just smell fear, he smells intent. His auditory range is enhanced to pick up subsonic frequencies. His cognitive processing, well, let's just say he's running a quantum-level predictive analysis every second he's awake. He's not a dog. He's a walking, breathing, fully autonomous reconnaissance and threat assessment platform. And he belongs to us. The lead bailiff finally found his voice. I don't care who you are. You are in contempt of this court. You will leave now. Silas didn't even turn his head. One of his operatives simply shifted his stance slightly, and the bailiff froze, his bravado evaporating. The operative's hand rested on a sleek black device on his belt. It wasn't a gun. It was something else. Something clean and cold and efficient. The message was clear. Your laws, your weapons, your authority, they are irrelevant here. You are children playing with toys. Silas's focus remained lasered on Alex. The emotional bond, he said, shaking his head with a sigh, as if genuinely disappointed in a design flaw. That was the one unforeseen variable. The loyalty subroutine we programmed into the asset's neurochemistry was meant to be directed at its designated handler for the duration of a mission. We never anticipated this deep-seated transference. It's a glitch, a sentimental bug in the system that we have since patched in the 800 series models. But it makes this retrieval, regrettably, complicated. The sheer, staggering arrogance of the man was breathtaking. He was talking about the love between a man and his dog, a love forged in the crucible of combat, a love that had literally pieced Alex's soul back together, as if it were a software glitch. He has a name, Alex said, his voice dangerously quiet. It's Max. An asset does not have a name, Silas countered instantly, his smile gone. It has a designation, and Asset 734's operational contract with the Department of Defense has expired. He is to be returned to our facility for data extraction and system analysis. And then what? Alex pushed, his heart hammering. What happens to him then? Silas shrugged, a gesture of utter indifference. That's proprietary information. But I can assure you, his contributions to the next phase of our research will be invaluable. The unspoken words hung in the air. We will take him apart, piece by piece, to see how he works. In that moment, everything became crystal clear for Alex. This wasn't about law or ownership. This was a moral battle for the soul of his friend. He was the only thing standing between Max and a sterile lab table. He was the last line of defense. The fight wasn't a choice. It was an obligation. What is the price of loyalty? When a machine demands you surrender your family for the sake of progress, where do you draw the line? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The decision Alex has to make is one that will define the very meaning of his life. He tightened his grip on the leash, his knuckles white. He looked Silas dead in the eye, and for the first time since he'd returned home, he felt no fear, only a cold, hard clarity. "You talk about him like he's a machine," Alex said, his voice ringing with a conviction that silenced the room. "But a machine can't feel loyalty. A machine can't choose to run through a storm of bullets to save a friend. A machine can't have a soul." He leaned forward in his wheelchair, his body a coiled spring of defiance. "You can put a price tag on your technology, you can sign contracts with your generals, but you can't own him. Because I promised him. I promised I would never leave him. That's a promise that means more than any contract you could ever draft." Silas's face hardened, the mask of corporate civility finally falling away to reveal the cold predator beneath. "Promises made by broken men are breakable, Sergeant. You are in no position to make demands. You will give us the asset, or we will take him. The choice is yours. Make the logical one." But Alex knew logic had no place here. This was about a promise. And some promises you keep or you die trying. Alex's promise echoed in the silent, supercharged air of the courtroom. A line drawn in the sand. It was not a plea. It was a statement of fact. A law of nature as immutable as gravity. Staring into the cold, calculating eyes of Silas, the polished wood and sterile flags of the courtroom dissolved into a shimmering heat haze. The scent of floor polish was replaced by the acrid smell of diesel, sweat, and ancient dust. The low hum of the air conditioner became the roar of a merciless Afghan wind, a wind that carried the whispers of ghosts. He was back, in the Valley of Fire, on the last day of the world he had known. The sun was a malevolent god, beating down on them, bleaching the very color from the landscape, leaving only shades of tan and gray. Every rock shimmered, a potential hiding spot for an IED or a sniper. The weight of his body armor, the familiar chafe of the straps, the solid heft of his rifle. These were the constants in a world of lethal variables. His unit moved with the slow, deliberate caution of men who knew they were walking through their own graveyard. The village ahead was silent, too silent. No children playing, no dogs barking, just the occasional flicker of a curtain in a window, a ghost watching them pass. It was a textbook ambush site. Every man felt it, a cold knot in the pit of his stomach. Alex's gaze was fixed on Max, who was padding 20 yards ahead, his sable fur a dark ripple against the pale earth. Max wasn't just sniffing the ground. His head was on a constant fluid swivel, his ears a pair of fine-tuned radar dishes, his nostrils tasting the very molecules in the air. He was processing 1,000,000 data points, reading the unseen narrative of the village. Suddenly, Max stopped. He didn't slow down. He froze, a statue of perfect focus. A low growl, almost too quiet to hear, rumbled in his chest. It wasn't the high-intensity threat alert Alex knew from the courtroom. This was something different, subtle. A warning. Rico, his team sergeant, spoke into his comm, his voice a calm whisper. "What's he got, Alex?" "Not sure," Alex whispered back. "It's a low-level alert. He's telling us something's wrong, out of place." Max took 2 careful steps to the left, nosing at the base of a crumbling mud wall. He pawed at the dirt once, then looked back at Alex, his gaze steady and certain. Alex zoomed in with his rifle scope. He saw it, a nearly invisible filament of wire, thinner than a fishing line, stretched taut, just inches above the ground. It wasn't connected to a bomb. It was a tripwire, an early warning system for the enemy fighters hiding in the buildings ahead. Max hadn't just saved them from an explosion. He had saved them from walking blindly into a prepared kill zone. "Good boy, Max," Alex breathed, his heart swelling with a fierce pride. Good boy." Then all hell broke loose. It wasn't the tripwire. The attack came from the ridges above, a perfectly coordinated rain of fire. The world erupted in a symphony of destruction. RPGs shrieked, impacting with thunderous roars that shook the very foundations of the earth. The distinctive, terrifying chatter of machine guns tore the air apart, chewing up the ground around them, kicking dust and stone into their faces. A man screamed. The squad scattered, returning fire, their training taking over. Alex was moving toward cover when the world went white. A deafening roar swallowed all other sound. He felt himself lifted, thrown through the air like a rag doll. He landed hard, the impact a brutal, bone-shattering concussion. Pain, white-hot and absolute, flared in his legs. He looked down. His world ended. It was a ruin of shredded fabric, twisted flesh, and crimson sand. He tried to crawl, his fingers digging uselessly into the dirt. His vision tunneled. The sounds of the battle faded into a distant roar. This is it, he thought, a strange calm settling over him. This is how it ends. But it wasn't the end. A savage, desperate force slammed into his side. It was Max. The dog was a frenzy of motion, a snarling, barking whirlwind of loyalty. He ignored the bullets kicking up dust around him. He ignored the explosions. He clamped his powerful jaws onto the back of Alex's body armor and began to pull. It was an impossible task. A 90-pound dog trying to move a 200-pound man in full gear. But Max pulled. He dug his claws into the earth, his muscles straining, a guttural whine of exertion mixing with his ferocious barks. He was a shield, a tractor, a living embodiment of a promise to protect. As Max dragged him, inch by torturous inch, toward the cover of a large boulder, Alex's fading consciousness registered a scene across the small, chaotic valley. Another squad was pinned down. He saw their handler go down, a limp heap in the dust, and he saw their K9, a beautiful Malinois named Titan, circling his fallen master, barking in confusion and grief. Then he saw the others. They weren't ragtag insurgents. They moved with the cold efficiency of trained operatives. They flanked the dog. They didn't shoot him. They fired a net. A tranquilizer dart sprouted from Titan's flank. The magnificent animal stumbled, fought, then collapsed. They bundled him up and disappeared into the smoke. They hadn't killed the dog. They had captured the asset. The image burned itself into Alex's brain, a final, horrifying piece of a puzzle he didn't yet understand. He felt a final jarring pull as Max got him behind the boulder. The dog collapsed beside him, panting, his shoulder slick with blood from a piece of shrapnel. He nudged Alex's face, licking at the grime and tears, his warm brown eyes filled with a fierce, unwavering devotion. The next coherent thought Alex had was the smell of antiseptic and the rhythmic beeping of a machine. He was in a field hospital, a world of white sheets and hushed, urgent voices. His legs were gone. The fact was a cold, hard wall in his mind. He was broken. A piece of damaged equipment being sent home. He felt a wet nose on his hand. He looked down. Curled on the floor beside his cot, a bandage wrapped around his shoulder, was Max. They hadn't separated them. The dog had refused to leave. A wave of emotion so powerful, it felt like another explosion washed over him. It wasn't grief. It wasn't self-pity. It was a profound, soul-deep gratitude. He reached down, his fingers burying themselves in Max's thick fur. "You saved me, buddy," he whispered, his voice cracking. "You saved me." He looked into the dog's intelligent eyes, and he made the only vow that mattered anymore. A promise from one broken soldier to another. "I've got you now, okay? I've got you. We go home together. Always. I promise." The silence left in the wake of Silas's departure was a living entity, a cold, predatory vacuum that sucked the remaining warmth from the courtroom. The chaos that followed was not one of panic, but of sheer, unadulterated shock. A low murmur rippled through the remaining spectators, the sound of 100 shattered realities trying to piece themselves back together. Bailiffs, their weapons now looking like primitive toys, moved uncertainly through the room, their authority rendered meaningless. They had witnessed the law itself be dismissed, brushed aside by a man in a suit with the cold confidence of a god. The system had failed. The walls of their world had been proven to be made of paper. Alex Stone felt the shift in the atmosphere down to his marrow. He was no longer a petitioner. He was a target. The courtroom was no longer a hall of justice. It was compromised ground, the opening skirmish in a war he didn't understand. He looked down at Max, who was no longer snarling but stood rigid, a low whine escaping his throat, his intelligent eyes scanning every corner of the room. The immediate threat was gone, but the danger lingered, an invisible poison in the air. As a bailiff began to wheel him toward the exit, a voice cut through the haze. "Sergeant, a moment." It was Judge Albright, standing down from his bench, his black robes seeming less like a symbol of power and more like a shroud. He dismissed the bailiff with a wave of his hand and approached Alex, his face etched with a deep, profound weariness. He knelt down, an act that stunned Alex, bringing himself eye to eye with the man in the wheelchair. "Sergeant Stone," the judge began, his voice a low, urgent whisper that was for Alex alone. "What you saw in my courtroom today, I want you to understand. That was not a failure of justice. That was an absence of it. The law, our law, has borders. It has walls. There are people in this country, powerful people, who operate in a world without any walls at all." He looked over his shoulder, ensuring they were not being watched. "I saw your file. I saw your service. I was prepared to follow the letter of the law and sign that order. I would have been wrong." The confession was a quiet thunderclap. The judge, the system itself, was admitting its own impotence. Albright reached into his robe and pulled out a small, simple business card. It was blank except for a single, handwritten phone number. "I have no jurisdiction over men like that," the judge said, pressing the card into Alex's hand. His grip was firm, a transfer of something more than paper. "But I know a man who does. He and I go back a long way. He served. He understands the shadows. Tell him Judge Albright sent you. Tell him it's a matter of sovereign integrity." He squeezed Alex's hand one last time. "Be careful, Sergeant. Your war isn't over. You just brought it home." With that, he stood up, straightened his robes, and walked away. Once again, the impassive pillar of the law, leaving Alex clutching the small, explosive piece of paper. The drive home was a descent into a new kind of paranoia. Every car in his rearview mirror was a tale. Every pedestrian talking on a phone was a spotter. The familiar tree-lined streets of his quiet suburban neighborhood no longer looked like home. They looked like a tactical nightmare. Poor lines of sight, multiple avenues of approach, no defensible perimeter. His mind, honed by years of threat assessment, was now at war with his own life, turning his sanctuary into a trap. He wheeled himself inside his small house, the silence within its walls now feeling menacing. He looked at the pictures on his mantelpiece, a smiling photo of his parents, a faded picture of his high school football team. They were relics from another life, another man. He was no longer that person. The war had burned that man away, and Aegis Dynamics had just swept his ashes from the table. He was cornered, He was outmanned, out-resourced, and facing a phantom enemy with limitless power. The feeling of helplessness was a cold tide, rising in his chest, threatening to drown him. He could run. He and Max could disappear, live life on the road, always looking over his shoulder. But then he looked down at Max. The dog was leaning against his wheelchair, a warm, solid presence, his head on Alex's knee, looking up with eyes of absolute, unwavering trust. Max wasn't afraid. He was ready. He was waiting for his handler, his partner, his alpha, to give him an order. And in that moment, the helplessness shattered. It was replaced by a clean, cold fury. They had underestimated him. They saw a man in a wheelchair and assumed he was crippled in spirit as well as in body. They had forgotten who he was. He was a sergeant. He was a leader of men, and you do not corner a wolf unless you are prepared to deal with his fangs. He wheeled himself to the phone, his movements sharp and deliberate. He ignored the judge's card. The shadows could wait. A war was coming, and you don't fight a war with spies. You fight it with soldiers. He pulled out a worn leather wallet, and from a hidden flap, he retrieved a small, creased piece of paper with a phone number on it. It was a number he had sworn he would never use again. His thumb hovered over the keypad. This was a call he couldn't take back. It was an admission that he needed help. More than that, it was a decision to pull someone he cared about back into the very darkness he had escaped. But he had no other choice. He dialed the number. It rang once, twice. A voice answered, gravelly and instantly familiar, a voice that had once screamed commands over the roar of gunfire. Diaz. Alex closed his eyes, a wave of profound relief washing over him. Rico, he said, his voice cracking with the weight of the single word. It's Stone. There was a half-second of silence. Then, a sharp intake of breath. Alex? Brother, where the hell have you been? You sound like you've seen a ghost. Alex opened his eyes. They were cold and clear as steel. Worse, he said, his voice dropping to a low, intense whisper. The ghosts are coming for me. Rico, I'm compromised. I'm on the home front, but I'm in a fight, and I need my team sergeant. There was no hesitation, no questions, only the immediate, unquestioning loyalty of the Brotherhood. Say no more. Rico's voice came back. All business, the sound of a warrior snapping to attention. Send me your coordinates. I'm on my way. As Alex hung up the phone, the fear was gone. The dread was gone. For the first time in years, the warrior inside him was fully awake. He was no longer a target. He was a commander, and his unit was on its way. The war had come to his door. Now he was going to fight it. The roar arrived before the man did. It was a deep, guttural thunder that tore through the manicured peace of the suburban afternoon. The sound of a big-bore V-twin engine announcing its arrival with unapologetic force. Neighbors peered through their blinds, their faces masks of disapproval at this sudden intrusion of noise and power. Alex Stone watched from his front window, a slow smile spreading across his face for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. It was the sound of the cavalry. The Harley-Davidson, a black and chrome beast, rumbled to a stop at the curb. The man who swung his leg over the side was built like the boulder Max had dragged Alex behind. Jake Rico Diaz was a mountain of a man, his arms covered in a tapestry of faded ink, his beard thick and untamed. But his eyes, beneath a brow heavy with things seen and never forgotten, were sharp, intelligent, and instantly assessing. He gave the quiet street a single sweeping glance, a professional's evaluation of the terrain, before his gaze locked on the front door. He wasn't carrying a six-pack. He was carrying 2 heavy matte black Pelican cases, the kind that held either expensive camera gear or the tools of a very dangerous trade. The reunion on the porch was a masterpiece of unspoken communication, a firm, bone-jarring handshake, a clap on the shoulder. Rico looked down at the wheelchair, then back up at Alex's face, and in that single look he dismissed the chair and acknowledged the man. "Good to see you, brother," was all he said, his voice a low rumble. He then dropped to one knee, offering the back of his hand to Max. The dog, after a brief professional sniff, licked his knuckles. "Heard you put on a show for the suits, you magnificent beast," Rico murmured, scratching the dog's thick neck. "Knew you always had it in you." There was no talk of the past, no time wasted on sentiment. The house became their new forward operating base. The quiet suburban sanctuary, where Alex had nursed his wounds, became a hardened, defensive position. They moved with the fluid, economical grace of men who had done this 1,000 times before in places far less forgiving. Rico opened the cases, revealing a professional-grade array of surveillance cameras, motion sensors, and communication jammers. Alex, from his chair, became the mission commander, a schematic of his own home spread across the kitchen table. "They'll do a soft probe first," Alex stated, his finger tracing a line from the street. "Probably at night. Test our response time. The big picture window in the living room is a kill zone. It needs to be covered." "Already on it," Rico replied, not looking up from the camera he was wiring. "I'll set up overlapping fields of view from the oak tree across the street and the gable on the roof. They can't approach without us seeing them from 2 angles. The doors are our weak points. We hardened them first." The roar arrived before the man did. It was a deep, guttural thunder that tore through the manicured peace of the suburban afternoon. The sound of a big-bore V-twin engine announcing its arrival with unapologetic force. Neighbors peered through their blinds, their faces masks of disapproval at this sudden intrusion of noise and power. Alex Stone watched from his front window, a slow smile spreading across his face for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. It was the sound of the cavalry. The Harley-Davidson, a black and chrome beast, rumbled to a stop at the curb. The man who swung his leg over the side was built like the boulder Max had dragged Alex behind. Jake Rico Diaz was a mountain of a man, his arms covered in a tapestry of faded ink, his beard thick and untamed. But his eyes, beneath a brow heavy with things seen and never forgotten, were sharp, intelligent, and instantly assessing. He gave the quiet street a single sweeping glance, a professional's evaluation of the terrain, before his gaze locked on the front door. He wasn't carrying a 6-pack. He was carrying 2 heavy, matte black Pelican cases, the kind that held either expensive camera gear or the tools of a very dangerous trade. The reunion on the porch was a masterpiece of unspoken communication. A firm, bone-jarring handshake, a clap on the shoulder. Rico looked down at the wheelchair, then back up at Alex's face, and in that single look, he dismissed the chair and acknowledged the man. "Good to see you, brother," was all he said, his voice a low rumble. He then dropped to one knee, offering the back of his hand to Max. The dog, after a brief professional sniff, licked his knuckles. "Heard you put on a show for the suits, you magnificent beast," Rico murmured, scratching the dog's thick neck. "Knew you always had it in you." There was no talk of the past, no time wasted on sentiment. The house became their new forward operating base. The quiet suburban sanctuary where Alex had nursed his wounds became a hardened defensive position. They moved with the fluid, economical grace of men who had done this 1,000 times before in places far less forgiving. Rico opened the cases, revealing a professional-grade array of surveillance cameras, motion sensors, and communication jammers. Alex, from his chair, became the mission commander, a schematic of his own home spread across the kitchen table. "They'll do a soft probe first," Alex stated, his finger tracing a line from the street. "Probably at night. Test our response time. The big picture window in the living room is a kill zone. It needs to be covered." "Already on it," Rico replied, not looking up from the camera he was wiring. "I'll set up overlapping fields of view from the oak tree across the street and the gable on the roof. They can't approach without us seeing them from 2 angles. The doors are our weak points. We harden them first." The video's final shot is of the 3 of them on that porch, as the last light of day fades. The suburban homes behind them are lit up, families inside watching TV, living quiet lives, oblivious to the fortress in their midst. But this house is dark, ready. Alex, Rico, and Max sit in the twilight, 3 warriors watching the horizon, waiting not in fear, but with a calm, absolute resolve. The final voiceover begins, the AI voice deep, resonant, and filled with an unbreakable conviction. "For years I believed my war was over. I believed the silence of this neighborhood was the peace I had fought for. I was wrong. The peace was just a ceasefire. The war didn't end. It just changed its uniform. It followed me home. But this time, I'm not fighting for a flag on a foreign field. I'm not fighting for a government or a politician. I'm fighting for my family. I'm fighting for my brother. And some promises are forged in fire. They don't break, they don't bend, and they will never ever be surrendered." And so, on a quiet suburban porch, under a sky bleeding from dusk into night, a new war began. It wasn't a war fought with armies or for territory, but one waged with resolve, with vigilance, and with the unbreakable strength of a promise. The scent of gun oil, clean and sharp in the cooling air, was not the smell of conflict, but the perfume of commitment. In that moment, the 3 figures sitting in the twilight, a man in a wheelchair, his brother in arms, and the faithful dog between them, were not victims waiting for a fight. They were a single unit, a fortress of loyalty standing against the coming storm. The story of Sergeant Alex Stone and Max is more than just a tale of one man and his dog. It is a testament to a truth that every service member knows in their bones. The uniform may come off, but the honor is woven into your soul forever. The battles may end, but the promises made in the heat of combat have no expiration date. They are carried home in the quiet chambers of the heart, a sacred trust that time cannot erode and bureaucracy can never understand. This story reminds us what true strength looks like. It is not the absence of scars, but the courage to stand and fight for what you love because of them. Alex Stone's real power was not lost in that valley of fire. It was forged there. It was in his refusal to surrender his family, his refusal to be defined by his wounds. And it was in the quiet, unquestioning loyalty of his friend, Rico, who answered the call, not out of duty, but out of love. That is the brotherhood that forms the bedrock of our nation's spirit, a bond that asks for nothing and gives everything. Perhaps the deepest lesson here is that justice isn't always found in a courtroom, dispensed by a judge with a gavel. Sometimes, justice is simply a choice. It is the choice to stand up when you are told to stand down, the choice to protect the vulnerable against the powerful. It is the choice to honor a promise when it would be easier to forget. Alex and Rico were not looking for a fight, but they would not shrink from one, because they understood that some things are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. Their actions speak to the very heart of the American character, a fierce independence, a deep-seated belief in what is right, and the profound strength found in standing together. Here at NX Incredible Stories, we believe these are the tales that need to be told, the stories of quiet heroes, of silent promises, and of the incredible resilience of the human spirit. If this story of courage and unbreakable loyalty has touched your heart, please help us continue our mission. Like this video to show your support for warriors like Alex and Rico. Share it with someone who understands the meaning of honor. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel for more stories that honor the sacrifices of our nation's finest. Because for every soldier who comes home, the battlefield may change, but their honor is eternal.